Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we're going to be looking at how Jiffy, my 150 gram ant weight with no 3D printed parts, went at ARC's May meet. Of course, we've just done a build video on this on the channel, so if you want to see that, the link will be in the description down below. Anyway, we're going to jump straight on into the fights. So our first fight up is against a robot called Brastoff. It is a nasty vertical spinner, which had me a little bit worried because in testing of this design, it couldn't really drive upside down all that well.
3, 2, 1, go!
So that was interesting. Basically, the fight there was cold because of an exposed battery. I'd done enough damage to his front wedge to peel him open and expose his battery, and therefore he lost that fight. It was a very interesting fight though, lots of big blows exchanged early on. We both ended up upside down, and to my delight, I was actually able to drive a little bit while upside down, and that was actually because when I was running this in my test box here at home, I wasn't running the weapon much past about 50%, actually more like 25%, whereas in the arena I was just full throttling the weapon, and for some reason when I was doing that I was still able to touch the ground with the wheels and get a little bit of movement out of it. So I was basically attempting to Daedalus around the arena by slamming the weapon into the wall and throwing me across the arena into him, which worked well enough for a time. I did also manage to do some weird gyro-y thing where I kind of stood up for a moment, and then when I was standing up, the weapon was holding me in place with the gyro force, so I literally just turned the weapon off and let the weapon fall and slam into him, which was fun. I'd never done a kind of like weird reverse suplex like that before, so I'm not sure I could do that if I wanted to, but I would really like to try again at some point. So then, of course, we did both get back up the right way, and then repeated hits into, well, both weapons kind of caused a bit of damage. So his weapon broke entirely, and my weapon actually started to loosen up. The sound that you hear right at the end of that fight is the weapon loose on the brushless motor. It was not a happy camper coming out of that fight. And I believe that what that was to do with is because I had the weapon spinning in the right direction, or the wrong direction technically, but the direction so that during each hit it was loosening the nut off just a little bit, and so by the end of that fight it was totally loose. It was still getting a little bit of spin up due to friction and things, but it wasn't getting anywhere near the speeds it was getting at the start of the fight. So that was fight number one, and it was fairly brutal, to be perfectly honest. And then fight number two, we're facing Drummer Boy, which is another really heavy hitting vertical spinner, this one being a drum.
3, 2, 1, go!
So before I went into that fight, I had tightened my weapon bolt up and reversed the weapon, so it was actually tightening every time it was hitting, which was a good thing. But it didn't really matter too much in this fight, as it turns out. There was only really a couple of big hits in there, and then he got turned off or something, question mark. I don't really know what actually happened there. He might have been high-sided, he might have had something kind of shut down inside the robot. Either way, he got stuck. Then I was kind of driving around the arena a little bit, hit the wall and got flipped over, and was just kind of messing with the gyro a little bit before deciding I probably should just turn myself off and win the fight. Yeah, so that was that fight. It was very quick, which is interesting. But then again, when you bring a fairly hefty weapon into a fight, sometimes that happens. Next up, we are fighting Smasher. Smasher is an overhead hammer bot driven by one of the youngest drivers in our league.
3, 2, 1, go!
So that was a draw, and that was a draw because I'm bad at driving apparently, and the walls were my worst enemy in this meet, especially with this particular robot. They weren't quite as tight as they normally were, which meant they had a bit of flex, so when you hit them with a weapon, they gave that all right back to you, which, yeah, wasn't great particularly. I mean, I did end up upside down, and then, unlike what I'd been doing previously, the weapon had kind of taken a bit of a beating going up against two verts, so it wasn't spinning up up all that quickly, and it meant that I couldn't gyro my way weirdly back over top again. And I really only didn't get counted out there because Nath did come along and push me back into the wall, which did help me not get counted out. Then from there, by some miracle, the weapon came back alive for one spin up, and that was all I needed to get back up over onto my wheels, doing that weird gyro-y thing that I did. But at that point, the weapon died. It gave up the ghost entirely. It was like, yep, I've done it. You've 2 hefty fights, and then this where you slam me into walls. I'm done. So the weapon died entirely, which left me with a push bot that doesn't really push because it was never designed to push, up against a robot that was actually designed to push and hit things. So yeah, if ARC was going on judges, he would have had that fight easily because of weapon hits and aggression and all sorts of stuff, but ARC doesn't do that, so instead it was called as a draw. So next up, I had a fight against a cheese wedge called Chupy. So of course I replaced the weapon motor, made sure that it was spinning in the right direction for tightening the bolt. And then also the other thing that happened is the top angle camera died, so we've only got the one angle on this fight.
3, 2, 1, go!
So that was, again, another fairly quick fight. However, I didn't think it was going to be all that quick. Those first exchanges where I was hitting the wedge, nothing seemed to be happening. It just kind of skidding up the wedge and not really doing anything. Basically, the blade was just deflecting and I wasn't getting any bite, any purchase. Nothing was really happening. I kind of knew I had to go for the wheels, but didn't know if I was going to be a strong enough driver to pull that off. Thankfully, did manage to do that, and really all it took was one hit on the wheels to boof that entire wheel out. And then, of course, he couldn't drive anywhere, so he lost the fight. Now, at this point, we only have one fight left to go for the day, and that fight is up against Antimatter. And we're sitting pretty good right now. 3 wins and a draw, and basically all of our wins have been fairly convincing up until this point. But of course, historically on this channel, Antimatter has always been a challenge.
3, 2, 1, go!
Huh, what happened there? I think we need to see that again. Yep, that's right. I out of the arena'd myself. Not even off antimatter this time, but off the wall. And for whatever reason, that just seems to be the way it goes when I fight antimatter with a horizontal. I've fought antimatter with a horizontal 3 or 4 times now, and I think I've ooted myself at least 3 of those times. It's ridiculous how I keep doing this in these fights up against antimatter. However, I will say this thing hits real hard. We took a decent amount of damage on antimatter there before throwing ourselves out of the arena, which again, how, why, anyway, that does mean that we had 3 wins, a draw, and a loss for this event. And I would say that makes Jiffy, which is what I called this because it's made of a Jiffy box, I would say that makes it a fairly competitive robot and a fairly competitive design. And it also does mean we got 2nd place for the entire event. And in actual fact, the person who got 1st place was Nath with Smasher. So he did really, really well in this event, and I believe if I'd beaten Antimatter in that final fight, because we didn't have actual finals, we just did points by, I believe I would have come 1st, but you know what, I'm not complaining. A 1st in the Beatles and a 2nd in the Ants is pretty good in my book. Anyway, that's going to be it for this video. Next week we'll talk about the B League and the Flea League all in one video. Hope to see you there.